So once they got back to LA, they dropped Maxine off and were cruising Hollywood, cruising for another liquor store to hold up or any kind of petty theft. And that's how they got caught up on Carlos Avenue. I encourage you to read the book and to watch the film. There's a lot of information, a lot of layers before and after the crimes involving Officer Ian Campbell and Officer Karl Hettinger. They have stories to them, and it puts things more in perspective. After this happened, Officer Karl Hettinger dealt with what's called PTSD and survivor's guilt. On September 4th, 1963, Jimmy Smith was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, which got changed to life in prison. He was eventually paroled out a few times and always made his way back to prison. He ended up dying in prison. He died at the age of 76 of a heart attack. On September 4th, 1963, Gregory Powell was convicted of kidnapping Officer Campbell and Officer Hettinger and murdering Officer Campbell. He was sentenced to death in November of that same year, but his sentence was commuted to life in prison, and he ended up dying in 2012 of prostate cancer. Officer Karl Hettinger died May 4th, 1994, of liver failure. He was cremated. Officer Ian Campbell is buried at Forest Lawn in Glendale. So definitely a very tragic killing of Officer Ian Campbell, and tragic as well as what this killing did to the life of his partner, Officer Karl Hettinger, the emotional toll it took upon him and his family. So I want to thank you all for joining me again on another true crime episode of 2S The Horror Quarters podcast. This one here is another Ghosts of LA edition. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one. Okay, I wanted to bring in Dan Wells. Dan Wells has been a police officer for 22 years in the Bakersfield area, and I wanted to kind of speak to him about this case and what he had heard about it, especially coming up in that area. Dan, any kind of insight into the case when you were in the academy or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I had heard about before. I knew about the Onion Field murder in the movie prior to ever going to the academy. But when I went to the academy in 2000, it is something that they bring up to us as a training tool. The incident, how it occurred, how it happened, and what better things can be done to make corrections so that something like that doesn't happen again.
Okay, so they pulled him over, and they were actually on Carlos heading eastbound. That when they pulled him over, they made a right onto Gower and pulled over there on the southwest corner. And hearing about this now, when you think like, damn, this is how they approached the car. Officer Campbell, who was driving his vehicle, it was unmarked, and he got out with a flashlight, as did Hettinger. I don't know how the procedures now, how that would work. They got out with a flashlight. Officer Campbell walks up to the driver's side and talks to Gregory Powell. A couple of questions. Hey, what are you doing? On the other side is Jimmy Lee Smith. Now, Jimmy Lee Smith gets out of the vehicle on his own, which is no bueno these days, but he gets out, puts his hands up. Hey, man, we're good, Now, on the other side of the car, the driver's side of the car, Officer Campbell asked Powell to get out. And Powell, noticing that all he had was a flashlight on him, Powell turns to his right and reverses his body towards the street to get out. And in doing so, grabs his weapon, which was tucked in his coat, turns around and got it right on Officer Campbell, turns Campbell around, puts the gun to Campbell's back, walks him over to Officer Hettinger. Nowadays, that probably wouldn't be procedure, right? With just flashlights, or am I wrong?
No, you're looking at a major difference between 1963 and 2022.
Okay.
Obviously, a lot of advancements in law enforcement, especially in the field of training. It's situations like this that we use for training to figure out the best tactics for approaching a vehicle, to approaching a suspect. And I said, these are the kind of things we'll talk about over and over. In this case, will be talked about forever in law enforcement, and the mistakes that were made and how things can be done better.
Okay. Was there a particular cloud that this case kind of weighs over Bakersfield? I mean, to this day?
The story weighs over Bakersfield simply because the murder actually happened up closer to here. They were brought here, so it's something that's known around here. I mean, it didn't really have much ties for Bakersfield other than the fact that they drove here. Right. But because it occurred closer to here, that we do hear about it.
Okay. And I know that they kind of said the same thing to Officer Hettinger when they wrote that memorandum saying, don't ever give your weapon up, and, talk to roll call for us, tell them about the mistakes you made. And I don't know that he made any mistakes. Like, again, it's not for me to pass judgment. I don't know what I would have done, but based on your experience, were there any mistakes made? What can you say about that?
Well, there were obviously mistakes made. I mean, 2 officers were kidnapped and 1 was murdered. So, yeah, there were obviously mistakes made. But it happened. It was a bad situation. As far as him giving up his gun, that training will never change. Officers will always be trained, do not give up your weapon, never give up your weapon.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's common training. That'll never change. Whether or not he should have at the time, I mean, I would only leave up to him. Okay. He made that decision. His partner told him to make that decision. His partner was in fear for his own life and told him to. Now, like I said, it's training never to do that, and most officers will continue to tell you that. They'll always tell you that, but until you're standing in his shoes in that situation, it's always going to be a guessing game and a judgment call.
Yeah, I mean, around that specific time, too, there were 3 cases, I believe all in L.A., where an officer had to give his weapon up. And in all 3 cases, the officer and officers involved ended up okay. So at the time, maybe that was in the back of their mind, like, okay, well, we're going to be okay based on the 3 previous ones. Again,
a gun to your partner's back and the guy's saying, hey, man, give up your weapon. I don't know what else there would be to do.
I think the most pressing issue would probably be the fact that his partner himself, who was in trouble, told him to give up his weapon. If there was anything that swayed his decision making, I would have to say that was it. When your partner, who is depending on you at the moment, tells you to give up your weapon, no officer, or very few officers, would give up their weapon in other situations. But in that situation,
yeah,
his partner was telling him to give it up, and his partner was the one in trouble. So he made a decision based on probably at that moment the well-being of his partner.
Now they say it happened near Bakersfield, but I'm calling it Bakersfield because even the address there at the Opal Fry Ranch is Bakersfield. They took him up there with the intent. Mostly, this is all on Powell. I mean, obviously it's on Smith as well too, but Powell was the main driver in all this. As far as what his plans were. And his plans, even though he told the officers that he's going to let him go in the field there, his plan was to kill him. He shot Officer Campbell, and Officer Hettinger took off running. I mean, what else is he supposed to do? You got two men who have all four guns.
Had Hettinger not ran, he'd have been dead too. I mean,
sure.
That was the intention. They were going to kill him right there. He ran. It was already too late for his partner. He ran. He survived.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to second guess him on that either. I've never been in that situation, but he did what he had to do, and he got out of there, and he survived, and he's very lucky he did.
And we spoke about this a little earlier. It happened on a Saturday night. Officer Hettinger went back to work Monday. That wouldn't happen now, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Incident like this happened, I would say probably lucky if he ever went back to work, but he would definitely be off for a while.
Yeah.
Getting over this situation or coming to grips with what happened.
Yeah, he dealt with a lot of PTSD and survivor's guilt over the years.
Yeah, 1963 PTSD wasn't something they worried about too much. You got in a shooting, you got involved in an incident, you went right back to work.
Precisely. Yeah. And it drove him into a depression. He started to shoplift blatantly, just in front of people. And the idea behind that, at least the thought process that I've read, is his guilt. He just wanted to be caught for something, and it was traumatic what happened to him, but he kind of recouped. He became a gardener. And after that, he ended up getting elected for Kern County supervisor, went into politics, and unfortunately passed away in 1994. But to me, they're both American heroes, considering what they went through that night. And I wanted to bring you in just because, you're up there, you work up there, you went there for me and checked out the layout of the land, which I appreciate too.
Oh, no problem. I'd love to be involved in anything like this. I mean, it's a bad situation. Nobody wants to relive it, but
right.
It's something to happen. And like I said, we'll talk about it. Law enforcement will talk about this forever just because of the training aspects of it.
Okay. Well, hey, Dan, I appreciate the time, brother.
Thank you, Mike.
And we'll chat soon, all right?
All right. Have a good one.